Thanks for tuning in to Written on the Edge, Season 7, Episode 29. I'm Vance Bastian here with my co-host, S.A. Baz Collins.
Howdy!
And we're really glad you're here with us. On today's show, J. Marshall Freeman joins us to discuss his latest novel, Barnabas Bopwright Saves the City, followed by our review of The Umbrella Academy. That's right, all 3 seasons. Then Baz and I will share what's held our attention this week. So if you like hearing updates about queer content creators, support us on Patreon, like us on YouTube, hit our merch store, do something to keep our lights on. But now, on to our guest. J. Marshall Freeman is the author of the young adult fantasy novels The Dubious Gift of Dragonblood and Barnabas Bopwright Saves the City, which came out in May. He's one of 3 authors in the YA novella collection 3 Left Turns to Nowhere, along with Jeffrey Ricker and Nathan Burgoine. Freeman is a 2-time winner of the Saints+Sinners Fiction Contest. He is currently researching and writing The Yonge Line, a novel set in Toronto's queer community in the early 1980s, and he himself lives in Toronto, Canada, with his husband. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back.
Well, welcome back. And we're glad to get this update because you teased us with this novel, and so now it's out.
That's right. See, I keep my promises.
Love it. So for folks who didn't hear that interview, just give us a really quick how you became an author, but then let's talk about Barnabas Bopwright.
I became an author. I did some writing in my late teens and early 20s, but then dropped it for a long time while I was doing more theater and music, and then got dragged back into writing fan fiction by a bunch of smart fangirls on LiveJournal when probably like in my 40s, and then started writing my own work, and 10 years later, here I am, and just putting out my second and a half novel.
Nice.
Second and a third novel.
Second and third, yep.
1/3 of, yes.
Yeah.
All right, so tell us about Barnabas Bopwright Saves the City.
Barnabas Bopwright Saves the City is a adventure novel, somewhat of an urban fantasy adventure novel. It takes place in a version of our world, but with everything a little bit heightened. And it's about a 15-year-old bisexual kid named Barnabas Bopwright, who discovers that everything he thought about his city wasn't true. He thought he knows he lives in the greatest city in the world, everything works wonderfully, but why it works wonderfully and the secrets that have been kept for 100 years come to light. And he has to decide what is he going to do about these secrets, especially when he discovers that the city is in danger.
And you have subtly addressed one of my biggest critiques about writing children saving the world type stories, in that you've written, or at least told us, that Barnabas has realized the adults aren't going to do anything.
Yeah.
Which my big critique is always, why aren't the adults doing anything? So you've actually tackled it. What can you share about that?
I've read people critique YA. Why don't they just go to their parents and tell them? And I'm looking at a world where everything is extremely obvious. Extremely obvious we're in a climate emergency. In your country, extremely obvious that you have a gun crisis. And when the absolute obvious is presented, the response from the adult world, as it were, is, no, you don't understand, or no, that's not really possible, or no, the status quo will get us there. And I look at people like Greta Thunberg slamming people at the UN, and I look at the Parkland shooting survivors who are, going around making passionate speeches about what the gun control that's needed, and the incredibly condescending response they get. So Mike Barnabas and his friends certainly try to get the help that they need from the adult world, and keep getting disappointed until it's like, this disaster is going to happen unless we do something.
And I think it's also to the point that, even like in Stranger Things, it's the same scenario. The parents seem to be somewhat oblivious to what's going on. But I think from an adolescent's point of view, they are so insular because they're developing themselves in their world. They're separating themselves from the family unit and then trying to establish who they are. I speak of all this because my husband used to be a psychiatrist for troubled youth. That's why I've had these conversations with him. And it's just interesting because what they end up doing is, amongst their group, they create that family structure. And they have someone who's definitely on point, who's kind of the leader of their group. So they rebuild the family amongst their friends. So it kind of like, that's, I think, one of the reasons why it happens. And it's not always explained in books why people do that when they write about teens, but kind of from the teen perspective, that is how the world works for them. Their parents seem to be always obsessed with whatever they're doing, that the kids are on their own to figure it out. And I think a lot of that happens, and that's why it's prevalent in a lot of YA stuff, is that, it's that ideation that they're trying to find themselves and establish themselves amongst their friends and everything. And then it's the other side of it. Yeah. And their parents are just seen as, they're so involved with their world, they're doing adult things, they're adulting, that kind of thing. And I think that's why you have those critiques.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I think there's a learned helplessness in adulthood. We've accepted the propaganda so much that the system is the only system that could be, and then we're deeply enmeshed in it, financially and socially. And kids who are just getting into the system, they're just growing from this, we're little kids where our needs are all taken care of, and they're on their way into adulthood. They haven't completely been propagandized yet, so they can sometimes see more clearly, and sometimes not. I try not to make the adults in my books into idiots. I like to show them as human beings who are struggling with their own things, and sometimes they do step in and say, "Oh, I get it. Okay, I see." And there are adults in this book who are there to help along the way, who do get it, but it's really the kids who keep running up against the wall of the authorities.
On that line, you have mentioned that the book, one of the themes in the book is fathers and sons. I'm assuming it's Barnabas and his father.
Sidebar. Wait, I didn't read that part of my notes. Yes, I'm sorry. Got it. I glanced over the note and skipped that part, and so I didn't have an answer ready. Why don't you ask me that again? I think I'm ready.
Okay. On sidebar. So along those themes, you had mentioned, one of the themes is fathers and sons. Are you referring to Barnabas and his father?
Yes. Barnabas ends up with multiple fathers over the course of the book, and there are other father and son relationships too. Barnabas is estranged from his own father, Brownbag Bopwright, who is a somewhat well-known jazz player who tends to neglect his family in favor of music. But he has a stepfather now who he likes but can't quite accept yet, and their relationship grows over the course of the book. And then there's also Barnabas's best friend, Wickram, once he has left the city for the Hidden Valley, which is part of the secret of the city. And Wickram's father runs the circus, Trajadenko's Circus of Humanity, and wants Wickram to take it over someday. And that's a tension for Wickram, who said, "No, I'm my own man. I'm going to do what I want, not just what you want." And so there's a lot of those kind of father and son tensions, and trying to find a way through it where they can respect each other and each other's needs and journeys.
Okay. So you had mentioned also the diversity of the cast. Who else? And what is their diverse nature?
Well, first of all, the main character is a bisexual 15-year-old who is just figuring out what his bisexuality looks like, and has a few chances over the course of the book to especially get to know this one character and allow his romantic feelings for him. First to emerge inside himself and just to accept his feelings, and then to find out what it's like to kiss him. And beyond that, I always like to have a diverse cast because we live in a diverse world.
Right.
There are multiple queer characters. There is a trans character who I won't talk much about because their trans identity actually comes as a surprise partway through the book, which was deliberate. It wasn't that here's a character and they are trans. Now watch them through that lens. It's like here's a character and you find out they're trans, and oh, I see. Which is how we discover things about each other, not necessarily that we have big headlines over our heads.
Right.
The flag tattooed on their forehead.
And then
there are characters, and they're different persons of color and mixed families, and things I like to include in that because that represents the world I know.
Nice. And obviously climate change is a major theme.
Climate change is not particularly a major theme. It is more like in a metaphorical way.
Okay.
The danger that the city faces is not a climate change; it's an actual terrorist threat. So when I talk about climate change, when I'm talking about the book, it's more like comparing it to what Greta Thunberg is doing. So the major theme is rather secrets kept from the public about how things work, and why it's better to always keep the public in the dark, according to the authorities, and the dangers that come from that.
Okay.
Dangers from not saying to the world, okay, here's the problems we have, you're all part of it. Instead, okay, let's just keep this a secret, and then everything will work out because we're wise and we know best.
Gotcha.
So no, climate change isn't particularly a theme of the book.
My apologies.
It's okay.
I mean, terrorism is also a major theme.
Right.
So anything else you want folks to know about the book?
I want you to know that the book is a lot of fun. It's has full of larger than life characters. It's got a great circus in there. It's got a fundamentalist portion of the Valley people who are against the circus and against having queer people as part of the vision of their basically theocracy that they're trying to create. And they have a steam-powered cathedral, which becomes a setting for one of the dynamic areas of the book. And
That's really
And
fun.
it has a fabulous cover.
Oh yes, I do have a fabulous cover by the amazing Ink Spiral Design, who does quite a few books for Nathan Burgoine. He did it in For Three Left Turns from Nowhere. He's based in London, England, and I'm really, really excited. Should I show the cover?
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Yay.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's, I love it. It's something big and bold, but then the way he did the city, so you can just see the city on the edge of the cliff, which is where the city is, unbeknownst to its inhabitants.
That's awesome. All right. So, what you've got coming up? I know you teased us with the Yonge Line.
Yeah, the Yonge Line is this kind of terrifying novel I'm writing. It's not young adult, even though the main character is 18, and it's interesting making that distinction between what is a YA novel and what is just a novel starring a younger person. And it was based
So it's
on
more
a
new
thought
adult?
puzzle.
It's
No.
more new adult? No? Okay.
No, it's a literary novel that has an 18-year-old main character. And it's funny. When I started writing YA, I was very against that distinction. It's just demographics. But I have come to learn that when I'm writing a YA novel, I'm writing it with a particular audience in mind, and with a certain themes that I'm trying to explore, that and for them, with them in mind. And I'm finding that different than how I'm thinking of this novel. So it's kind of scary novel, which was for me personally, just emotionally, because it's based on not necessarily myself as the main character, but closer than I've come to that, where I realized that if in 1981, when I was 18, if I had come out then instead of like 25, which is really when I more or less flew out the closet door, that I would have been right in the crosshairs of AIDS if I had joined the gay community at that point. And then I started looking at that time, and it was actually fascinating because it was right after the bathhouse raids in Toronto, which were kind of our Stonewall. And there was a coordinated attack on all the baths in Toronto by the police in one night, and all these arrests and tons of property damage. And the gay community had enough and marched, hundreds of people marching the next night, breaking through police barricades. And it really was an interesting turning point. So I'm exploring that era and what it would mean for this person who, instead of staying in the suburbs very quietly and not figuring out who he is or going for it, is thrown into that by circumstances. And as is my way, it does end up having some kind of fantastical elements to it, but it also has to be very grounded in reality. So it's more research than I've ever done. And
Nice.
That's fun. I was just interviewing a gay elder yesterday about his time in Toronto in the 70s and 80s, and that was really interesting.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that one. As
Right.
a
And it's always great when we can include our
child of the 80s
gay elders.
myself. Yeah. Well, anything else? Are you doing any appearances for Barnabas Bopwright? Any online events?
Not at the moment. The time it was released on May 10th, and kind of in that month there was a lot of things happening. I am going to, when schools start kicking back up, I want to get in touch with both English departments as well as queer clubs within schools, and about doing guest appearances either in person or digitally, and connect to the audience that way.
Nice. Very nice. All right. Any final words of wisdom?
I also discovered TikTok, so I am putting up TikTok, so that's fun.
Ooh, do we need to add that to your list of socials?
Yeah, Marshall Freeman on TikTok.
All right.
There was a reading. There's a 3-minute reading from Barnabas Bopwright. There was the unboxing video, as well as me lip syncing to Stephen Sondheim. So
very nice. Very nice. All right. Well, any final words of wisdom?
Listen to your kids. They're not idiots.
Amen.
Well, they're not more idiots than we are. That's the point.
Or we were. Or we were.
No, but they're also perceptive and passionate, and that's worth noting.
Yes. They're far more engaged politically than any generation.
Well, every age we go through has its own wisdom, and I like to think that rather than aging from year to year, from decade to decade, we collect our ages. And if we're really wise about it, we should be able to tap into the energy and the commitment of our teenage years, our 20s, even while we have, a different perspective in our 40s. But I think if you keep losing touch with all of your past selves, then you're missing a huge resource in your life.
True.
Well said.
Very true. And that was wisdom.
That was the final wisdom.
All right, folks, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to J. Marshall Freeman for being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
For us too, believe it. All right, we at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. If you enjoy learning about these artists, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Now, on to our review.
Hey, gals, gays, and theys. Welcome back to our review. This week we are doing the queer aspect and celebration within the show, The Umbrella Academy. And we're talking about the reasons why we think that it bears some notice from the community, because there are a couple of really strong things that they've done, and they've done it right, and we think that's a reason to celebrate it. Vance has his other take on it when we get to that part of it, but just so in case you've lived under a rock and don't know what the hell we're talking about, The Umbrella Academy is a story of a family of former child heroes, now grown apart, must reunite to continue to protect the world. And in season 3, actually from the very first season, it was established that time traveling was part of the story, primarily through the character number 5, who doesn't have a name that I don't ever think they've given him a name, have they?
So, because he so number 5, all the children were named, given numbers based on their order in the family because of their adopted father. The real short backstory is that they were born of immaculate conception. The father somehow knew this was coming.
Instantaneously.
Like a 3-hour pregnancy. The father knew this was coming through reasons explained in season 3, and so he tried to collect as many children as he could. He got 7. He didn't care to raise children. He didn't want to raise children. He was just trying to raise the people who would protect the timeline in the end. So he only gave them numbers. Number 5 has teleportation and time travel powers. He disappeared as a child before the family sort of fell apart, and it was after they grew up, and it was after they fell apart and grew up that they claimed their own names because their father had never given them names. So number 5 never got that because he fell into it time
Right.
thing. Just to preface my review, I have a hard time trusting time travel and time fix stories because they always change on you, so you don't know what to trust. You can't trust the world you thought you knew, which I think is the point, but that doesn't make them enjoyable to me, and I'm only stressing to me.
Okay, but how do you reconcile that opinion when you're looking at things like the Marvel universe, which definitely has a lot of elements of multiverse and different time sequences, and it. I mean, how do you square that?
The world is still the world, even though, like Doctor Strange, we'll take Doctor Strange, flipping through multiple dimensions. The world is still the world when he's done. He has just repaired the local fixes or the local problems that the bad guy has created, but he also comes out of it still Doctor Strange, having grown from the situation, but still at his core, he is still Doctor Strange. That is not the case with Umbrella Academy. Many of these characters are vastly different by the end, and it's not always a pleasant growth.
But I think that's partially why it works for me, because I think you can't go through something that monumental and not be vastly affected. I think that's one of the reasons why I have a problem in the Marvel universe, because it just seems so implausible that nobody has a huge swing of mood or direction. I feel exactly the opposite. I'll fold in very quickly Harry Potter with the sequence where they did the time displacement with Hermione having the time changer, the time twister, or whatever, I can't remember what it was called, that allowed her to move back and forth in time or to overlap time periods, or and so I kind of like those stories. I know they're preposterous, but one of the things I liked about this season and season 3 of Umbrella Academy, bringing it back to the show, is that I liked that the way they handle it in this universe, that was something monument, because each time they've done this, they've saved the world, quote unquote,
for a day.
And so it vastly changes everything. And I think this is the first time that I've seen it where they've used the grandfather paradox, and they've really explored what that means when we say it. And I think that it kind of points out its implausibility as much as it does its the dynamics of it, and whether or not we think. And one of the reasons why I like shows like this is because it makes you think about, how do we perceive time?
Sure.
And that's one of the things I like about time travel stories. Now, I'll tell you, my husband's right, and he's the physicist. He's right in the same boat with you. He doesn't like time displacement stories. With the exception of Back to the Future, I think that's the only one he enjoys. He kind of grumbles about all of them. But so I get your perspective, because it's my husband's perspective at the same time. But I like them because I like what they do. Sidebar. God damn it. All right, unsidebar. I like them because of what they offer the characters to pivot. And I feel, in my opinion, Umbrella Academy does it better than most, because I don't think you can go through the enormity of what they experience with these time shifts and these timeline changes. I know Back to the Future did it more for comedic effect. It allowed Michael J. Fox to play the absurdity of it to comedic effect, great comedic effect, him with Doc Brown. But in Umbrella Academy, I think it's the more serious side of how it would fuck with your head, and how the potential loss of messing around with time could really undo. Yeah, and it could easily turn you into a villain who feels justified in their anger and revenge and plotting because of how the situation has wronged them. So even if they were part of it,
Understood. let's focus on the two characters of interest to our LGBTQIA community. Klaus, go.
I love Klaus because Klaus has always been the ultimate queer in the whole season, all 3 seasons so far. I think he represents the spectrum all by himself.
Yep.
And he just, and it's kind of in a way it's bittersweet because I think he also experiences loss and regret on a much deeper emotional level. Yeah, I mean, he really feels it. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think, someone like Allison who goes through some of the things she just gets angry and right. lashes out but I think the two queer characters that have this whole element to them, I think they're handled with such care. And I think the way that they represent, especially with Elliot Page, transitioning in the COVID period where
we'll get
they
there.
weren't filming. Yeah.
Finish with Klaus.
Yeah. And so I think that Klaus gives us the freedom to establish queerdom and not label it.
Mm-hmm. Klaus also plays one of my favorite tropes in storytelling in that his powers are related to death, dying, ghosts, bordering on necromancy, though they never use that word in this series. But he is the dark death character who has the most life. He has the most joy, and even through his pain, and he tries to mask his pain with a lot of substance abuse.
Right.
But even through that, he is the most joyful character, and he celebrates his joy whenever he can find it.
Right, and in a way, when you deal with death at that level, mm-hmm. it probably makes you want to live as fully as you can in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
Vanya, dun dun dun.
Victor. It's our Victor Victoria kind of sequence here in that way.
And I would like to say that the writers of the show handle that better than IMDb does, because IMDb still calls the character Vanya.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think one of the things I loved about it is the way that Elliot plays it and how the other actors and the characters relate to this change. It just is. Mm-hmm. And, even Luther. Wait, what?
Yeah, because Luther finds out after everybody else.
I've gone for a day and you guys do all this.
Yep.
Poor Luther. He's not the brightest crayon in the box.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the actors do an admirable job, and I think the writing was very, very thoughtful about how to do it. And I'm mm-hmm. sure Elliot contributed a great amount of perspective for the writers to handle it in a way that was done very well. I also, that's the one element I did like about Ellison's development, even though she becomes the villain of sorts in this season. The way that her character Emmy's character of Allison deals with her sister becoming her brother, and the way that she supports him going forward is really, really kind of monumental. Right. And they don't lose, at least in the beginning, they don't lose that bonding connection, even though Allison is still raging and she's really...
At the beginning, there isn't. So at the very beginning of the series, Victor, who then is Vanya, has no connection to the siblings because Vanya didn't develop powers, which we find out later was because of Dad's interference. It adopted Dad's interference, and
right. He medically kept her temper down because he was the one that her father most feared out of the group.
But because of that, Vanya had lashed out and written a tell-all book before the series started. And so we're starting with the other siblings not wanting to interact with Vanya because of the tell-all book. And Allison was the first one to say, no, you know what? We're sisters. I'm going to be your big sister.
Right.
And so that then leads to the acceptance in season 2, where Vanya, who is becoming Victor, has a relationship with another woman and realizes an awakening of who they should have been all along.
And the funny thing about it is, I love all the actors' portrayals of the characters. I think that the cast is so well done. Mm-hmm. But you can tell that as a cast, they are very family oriented. You know, the way that the chemistry is so strong between them that you can see that they interact offset as much as they do on set. They have, I mean, one of my favorite pictures I've seen on YouTube and a couple of other places whenever they show it, there's a very famous picture of all of them being in an elevator, and I guess Tom Hopper, who plays number one, or Luther, he ends up farting during the scene in the pictures, all of them going like this, and he's just standing there going it's one of my, I mean, I just, it said so much about the cast and the characters all in one shot. And that's, I think, one of the beauties of this show, is that even though you may struggle with some of the elements of it, you know, I haven't shown it to my mom because my mom in her older age has problems with time displacement at this point. So I'd like her to watch it because I think she would enjoy it. But at the same time, you know, it's something you have to stay on top of.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Right. All right. What are your ratings?
All right. My ratings, if I can get my little list out from under my cat. She came up and landed square on the book. Okay. So overall, I give it a 4. There are some elements of all of the conversations that go on between the characters and the plot line that I sometimes go, you know, where are they going with this kind of thing? So I do have moments of that. So overall, I give it a 4. Script screenplay, I'm going to give it a 5, only because of the way that the queerdom is handled. It is done really well, and I think the characters are well developed. Oddly enough, number 5 is one of my favorite characters. I think he's snarky as all get out, and I think Aiden does a brilliant job playing someone who is trapped, you know, who is older in mind and thought, but is trapped in this teenager body because of his time displacement. He is now trying to grow into where mentally his head space and his emotions are, but he just kind of is this boy trapped in shorts. And you have to watch the show to get that. Sound, lighting, score, 5. I think that, you know, the way that they light the show, the way that it is, the art direction, also I give it a 5 because I think the production quality is top notch. I'm amazed that Netflix has let it go on this long because obviously they are spending the bucks on this show. Cast, 5. They're just all brilliant, all well done. They're very full-rounded characters. That's not a complaint I think anyone can throw at them. These actors have put their teeth into the role and have really done everything they can as performers to give you a very, very fleshy character to latch onto. Whether you like them or not, they relish there. And I will have to say, in season 3, with the addition of the Sparrow Academy, which is the new family that happens because of the time saving the world from season 2 going into season 3, we now have an alternate family that Hargreaves ended up, you know, pulling together. And so you have this disparity between the two dysfunctional superhero families. And that, I think I like the way that was done. So direction, I'm going to go back to a 4 because I just kind of think there were some things, like I said, I would every now and then would throw me out and I'd go, okay, you know, that kind of reaction, you know, you know, so, but, you know, all of the queer themes, 5. I'd give it a 10 if I could, because I think they really understand. And I haven't really read the comics, so I don't know if it has that same queer. And I think even all the characters have a queer sensibility about them. And I think that, like a lot of superhero stories, queer, it lends itself to queers watching it because it's always of the other, the outsiders, the outcasts. And in this case, they're outcasts with superpowers that could literally end the world as we know it. So they've got a lot to grapple with, but it's kind of what queer people have to do in everyday life. You know, straight people are just barely scratching the ice chips off the iceberg that is queer life, to understand how much we have to balance in our lives just to get from day to day to day to day. So I think that's one of the things that does really well. So my overall is a 4.75.
Wow, you went for a partial. All right. Production quality, I give it a 5. Baz is right. There was no shortage of money thrown at this to make this happen, including some of the better effects I've seen in a while. Script screenplay, a 3, mostly because I think in a lot of cases, elements that were confusing were not cleared up sometimes, and you were left to be confused, and if that was on purpose, I don't feel like it always worked. Sound lighting score, 5. Those all were on point, and I never had a complaint about any
Even
of them.
the use of music.
Especially the use of music, because there were a couple times when the music would cue in, and it's music the characters were hearing as well as the audience, and the characters were reacting to it, sometimes in a dance-off.
And it just works.
Even I got into it, and it did work, and it worked really well. It was one of the better weavings of score, sound, and music into action that I've seen in a while.
Yeah.
Casting, also a 5. Direction, also a 4 for similar reasons. I felt like the directors kind of pulled a couple, what are you going with this? Are you going to fix it? And then never did.
Yeah.
Queer themes presented, also a 5. And I say that both for the internal story as well as externally the way it was all handled. Including the rewriting of a character because of an actor's life change, which you don't always see, and was really, really well done. So my personal overall was a 4.5.
Okay. So, highly recommend it for queers to be able to watch this, and because I think, like Sense8, which is one that I'm going to try and get Vance to watch.
I'm not against it. It's just time.
But I think it's on that level that Sense8 is, where the queerness is an element to the story, but it is... It's handled very, very well. It is probably a textbook of this is how you do it, along with Pose and, this is how you do it,
Right.
And again, I think it probably comes back to the point that when queer people are involved at a level where we help shape and tell the story, I think it makes it a much richer story, And again, it's one of my purposes of saying, right now, for the time being, I am done with cis actors, straight actors playing us. I want to hear us tell our stories. As much as you give blacks the ability to tell their stories and the Asians to tell their stories. And I think queerdom has a way of showing how we can show the rainbow spectrum in the hue in the humans and tell the spectrum of our community at the same time. And I think when we can tell our own stories about it, it only will improve the greater conversation, because then the cis straight actors that are out there can get a handle and go, oh, okay, I see. So it gives them the opportunity for that exchange in an artistic forum. So.
Who won your week?
All right. So who won my week? I am going to say it's, I was out looking at my little Feedly and running through, and there is a new movie that's coming called Fellow Travelers, and it's based on the Tom Mallon's novel of the same name, which follows 4 decades of a romance between 2 men that blossoms in the backdrop of the McCarthy era Washington. And it is starring Jonathan Bailey from Bridgerton, who will play Fordham University graduate Tim Laughlin, and Matt Bomer, Mr. Gorgeous Blue Eyes and Square Chin. Actually, Jonathan's not too far off of that either.
No.
They've got some pretty strong chin lines. And Matt Bomer will play Hawkins Fuller, a State Department official who has no time for intimate connection. That is, of course, until he meets Laughlin. And so that's starting to get ramped up. It's a limited series, and I think it's going to be pretty freaking epic. So
Nice. My week, actually, you will probably appreciate this more than most. And I'm just going to read the article as printed because it's short and it's poignant. In a rare moment of return for East Coast Native Americans, the Onondaga Nation has had 1,023 acres of ancestral land in New York returned to them. Change and restitution are slow, but they're starting to happen.
But it's starting to happen, and this is also why it's important. And I will dovetail on what you're saying. There are several campaigns here in California, especially in this part of California, where the natives have several ballots on the initiative on the vote coming up. It is so important that we get out there and vote, because if the Republicans have their way, everything that we have worked so hard for will come apart at the seams. So, and that's another political drive. Get out and vote, plan your vote, make sure you know where in your community you're supposed to go. And if you can get absentee ballots, what you need to do to get them so they're accepted lawfully.
I was going to say, pay very close attention, because a lot of changes have been made as to where you can drop off absentee ballots legally. Right. A lot of changes. And they swept through Wisconsin, and now there's like one spot in my county where you can drop them off legally. Just be aware. No. I laugh, but it's just so I don't keep from crying. I know. So do your homework, because your vote counts.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And we need, it looks, because of several of the key races, that a lot of the Republicans have pushed really out there candidates, and people are really starting to take notice, especially because of Roe v. Wade and the gun control laws and yada, yada, yada. And the signals the Supreme Court is sending out. Judicial reform is highly back on the list again. We still have the ongoing war in Ukraine. There is real drive to get this right. And again, a big shout out to Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, who are probably some of the bravest out there in the Republican Party, actually doing the good work to keep our democracy as we've known it. So who knew? Who knew we would have that level of American patriots within that party that would step forward and say, hey. And I think the fact that she may lose her position, and he already said he's not running again, I think it's given them the freedom to pursue this with the vigor that they have. So,
right. All right, folks. Written on the Edges, produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.rotepodcast.com. If you enjoy learning about new artists or revisiting known artists like J. Marshall Freeman, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Hit us up on YouTube. We still need just some more followers so we can get like a real URL and not the YouTube burble. All right.
And go to our store to check out our merch.
New stuff. New stuff. That's all I'll say. All right. Tune in next week for your Queer Media Fix. Bye-bye.
Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.